Hello everyone! Welcome to another video on our channel. The story I witnessed and I'm about to tell you today will absolutely shock you to your core. But first, please smash that like button and subscribe to our channel. Trust me, you'll want to see what happens next after what I'm about to reveal. Hello there, dear ones. I'm Dorothy, but you can call me Grandma Dottie. I've passed my 80-something years, but what I'm about to tell you happened in 1958 and still haunts me every single night. This isn't just a family secret. This is a warning that could save your life. But before I reveal the terrifying truth, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because what happened to me could happen anywhere to anyone. And please, hit that subscribe button because you need to hear how this nightmare ends. Now listen carefully, because this story will change how you look at the people closest to you forever. When I married Harold in 1956, I thought I was the luckiest woman alive. I was just 20, fresh from my parents' house, completely naive about the evil that can hide behind a charming smile. Harold was almost 30, tall, handsome, always dressed like a movie star. Every woman in town envied me. But they had no idea what I was really walking into. After our wedding, Harold bought this beautiful house on Pine Street. Red brick, tall windows, spacious backyard, it looked like a dream. But there was something sinister about that house that I couldn't put my finger on. The basement door was always locked, always. And Harold's reaction when I asked about it? Ice cold. His eyes would go completely dark, and he'd change the subject, immediately. I should have trusted my instincts right then and there. But I was young, in love, and desperate to believe in the fairy tale. The first signs were subtle. Late at night, I'd hear sounds coming from below. Not normal house sounds, muffled moaning, like someone was in pain. Footsteps pacing back and forth. When I'd wake Harold, he'd brush it off. Just the wind, he'd say. But his hands were always shaking. You're probably thinking, Dorothy, why didn't you just demand to see what was down there? Well, in 1956, wives didn't question their husbands. We trusted blindly, and that blind trust almost cost me everything. The basement door haunted me. Every time I walked past it, my skin would crawl. Something evil was behind that door, and my husband was keeping it from me. The afternoons in that house felt endless, too quiet, too empty, and that locked door. It felt like it was watching me. Then came the day that changed everything. I was cleaning Harold's office, a room he rarely let me enter, when I found something that made my blood run cold. Hidden in his desk drawer was a set of keys, old, worn keys that didn't match anything else in the house. One key was larger than the others, heavy, with scratch marks all over it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it. This was it. This was the key to that basement door. The key to whatever Harold was hiding from me. That night, I made a decision that nearly killed me. While Harold slept, I crept down to that basement door. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure it would wake him. I slid that key into the lock, and it turned with a soft click. What I found down there, I can barely speak about it even now, 65 years later. The smell hit me first. Iron, mold, something rotting. The narrow staircase disappeared into complete darkness. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I had to know the truth. As I descended, that old wooden railing felt like ice under my fingers. Each step creaked like a scream. The single bulb hanging from the ceiling cast eerie shadows that seemed to move on their own. And then I saw it. Covered by a filthy sheet in the corner was a metal cage, small, narrow, with bars thick enough to hold someone. When I pulled away that sheet, I nearly collapsed. Inside were scraps of clothing, torn papers, and worst of all, nail marks, scratched deep into the metal walls. Someone had been trapped in there. Someone had tried desperately to claw their way out. But that wasn't the worst part. From somewhere deeper in that basement, I heard the most terrifying sound of my life, A whisper. Weak. Desperate. Help! Me! Someone was still down there. Someone was still alive. My entire body froze with terror. This couldn't be real. This had to be a nightmare. But before I could move, I heard footsteps above me. Heavy, deliberate. Harold was awake. The basement door slammed shut with a bang that echoed like a gunshot. The lock clicked, and suddenly I was trapped in complete darkness with whatever horrors my husband had been hiding. What happened next still gives me nightmares. Harold's voice came through the door, but it wasn't the man I married. It was cold, calculating, evil. You shouldn't have come down here, Dorothy. Now you've seen too much. I banged on that door until my fists were bloody, screaming for help. But we lived on a quiet street. No one could hear me. And Harold, he just walked away, left me there in the dark with that thing in the cage and whatever was making those whispers. Hours passed, maybe days. I lost track of time in that pitch black hell. The whispers got louder, more desperate, and I realized the horrible truth. I wasn't the first woman Harold had brought to this house. I wasn't the first wife who had gotten too curious about that basement, but I was going to be the last. When Harold finally opened that door, he wasn't alone. Two men in dark coats stood behind him. Their eyes were dead, empty. They looked at me like I was already a corpse. "She knows too much," one of them said. Harold nodded. "Take care of it." What I discovered about my husband that night was more terrifying than anything you've seen in your worst nightmares. Harold wasn't just hiding bodies in our basement. He was part of something bigger, something evil. A network of men who made people disappear. And I was supposed to be next. The fight for my life lasted hours. These weren't just killers. They were monsters who enjoyed what they did. They told me about the other women, the other wives who had asked too many questions. What they did to them before they ended up in that basement. I won't go into all the horrific details. Some things are too dark even for this channel. But I will tell you this. I survived because Harold made one crucial mistake. He underestimated me. He thought I was just another helpless housewife who would go quietly. He was wrong. The basement of that house on Pine Street held more than just Harold's victims. It held the evidence of an entire network of evil that stretched across the country. Missing women, murdered families. A conspiracy so dark that when I finally escaped and went to the police, they didn't believe me at first. But I had proof. Photos, documents, names, and most importantly, I had a witness. Someone else who had been trapped in that basement for years. Someone who had seen everything. The trial made national headlines. The Pine Street basement murders, they called it. Harold and his accomplices got the electric chair. But before they died, they confessed to dozens more murders. Dozens of families destroyed. That house was demolished years ago, but sometimes I still drive by that empty lot. And I swear I can still hear those whispers calling for help. If you're watching this and something doesn't feel right about someone in your life, trust your instincts. That feeling in your gut that tells you something is wrong, listen to it. It might save your life. The human monsters are real. They live among us. They marry us. They gain our trust. And then, when we least expect it, they show us who they really are. Don't let what happened to me happen to you. If this story gave you chills, please hit that like button and subscribe, because I have more true stories that will keep you up at night. And in the comments, tell me about any strange experiences you've had. Sometimes sharing these stories can save lives. Stay safe out there. And remember, the person sleeping next to you might not be who you think they are. Asking about it seemed dangerous, so I kept my questions to myself, ruminating during long, empty afternoons. But the house on Pine Street seemed to feed on secrets. And an unexpected visit on a gray Wednesday proved it. I was peeling potatoes for dinner when I heard the doorbell. I remember drying my hands on my apron, trying to ignore the bad feeling in my stomach. When I opened the door, I came face to face with two men I'd never seen before. Both wore dark coats, half wet from drizzle, and felt hats. The older one had deep wrinkles around his eyes, while the other, younger one, carried a leather briefcase under his arm. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Is Harold in?" asked the older one, his voice hoarse with an accent I couldn't identify. "He's at work," I replied, keeping the door ajar. "Can I help with something?" They exchanged glances briefly before the older one cleared his throat. "We're his brothers. You can tell him we stopped by." The word hung heavy in the air. Brothers? In 6 years of marriage, Harold had never mentioned any relatives, much less brothers. My mouth opened to ask more, but the younger man interrupted me, extending a card with an address written by hand. "Tell him to look for us. It's urgent." And then, before I could ask more questions, they walked away down the sidewalk, shoes echoing on wet cement. I stood in the doorway, clutching the card between my fingers, heart beating too fast. When Harold arrived that night, his shoulders were tense under his coat, eyes searching something on the floor before meeting mine. I didn't wait for him to settle. "Your brothers were here," I blurted out, extending the card. His face went pale in a way I'd never seen. He took the paper with rigid hands, trembling fingers. For a second, I thought he would deny everything, but instead, he breathed deeply, looking away. "They shouldn't have come," he murmured, almost to himself. The question escaped before I could avoid it. "Harold, you have brothers?" He looked at me finally, eyes darkened, and answered with a coldness that made my blood freeze. "I do, but it would be better for you not to know about it." That night, he didn't sleep in bed. He stayed locked in his office until dawn while I tossed between sheets, unable to shake the feeling that the truth was very close to coming to light. The silence in that house became unbearable. Every creak of wood, every rustle of curtains, seemed to hide something. Charlie left before dawn and returned late, face more tired each day. The shadows under his eyes betrayed sleepless nights, but he refused to talk about anything that wasn't work. The basement keys that once stayed in, his office had disappeared. I searched silently among papers and drawers, but the feeling of being watched never left me. It was as if the walls had eyes attentive to every movement, and then, on a rainy Thursday, everything changed. I was changing bed sheets when something fell from the inner pocket of Harold's coat, carelessly thrown on the chair. A small silver key with wear marks. My heart raced. I looked at the door to make sure I was alone, then picked it up with trembling fingers. Minutes later, I was before the basement door again. The air seemed colder, almost cutting. The key slid into the lock with a soft click, and the doorknob yielded with a low creak. The stairs descended in a spiral, swallowed by darkness. But this time I didn't hesitate. Each step creaked under my bare feet. The bulb hanging from the ceiling barely illuminated the corners, leaving thick shadows along the walls. I breathed deeply and advanced, letting the dim light guide my way to the back. Then I saw it. Hanging on rusty hangers were women's clothes, simple floral dresses stained with dust and something darker. Beside them, a shelf displayed glass jars with unknown liquids, faded labels marked with old dates. But the worst wasn't that. The worst was on the floor, among old newspapers piled up, photographs yellowed by time with worn edges showing women I'd never seen. Women smiling, posing in front of gardens, holding flowers. On all of them, fine handwriting noted names and dates on the back. And among them, one photo stood out, frameless, seeming more recent. The woman in the image wore a light blue dress, hair pulled back in a delicate bun, the shy smile seeming too familiar. I felt blood drain from my face when I turned the photo and read the date written in pencil, January 1956. It was the month Harold and I had married. A crack from behind made me freeze. The scream stuck in my throat when I suddenly turned and found Harold at the foot of the stairs, tall silhouette outlined against the weak light. His eyes seemed darker, fixed on the photo in my hands. He sighed, long and tired, running his hand through his hair like someone trying to buy time. "You shouldn't be here, Dottie." His voice was low, cold, almost a whisper. I backed away instinctively, stumbling over a wooden box. The smell of dust and iron seemed stronger, numbing my senses. "What does this mean, Harold? Who are these women?" My voice came out faltering, almost a whisper, but he just closed the door behind him, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "Let's talk upstairs." The words were more an order than a request, making it clear that escape wasn't an option. My hands trembled so much the photo slipped to the floor, falling at his feet. And at that moment, I was certain that nothing in that house was as I had imagined. Harold didn't speak until we reached the living room. He lit the lamp beside the sofa, creating circles of soft light that seemed to increase the surrounding silence. I sat in the nearest armchair, hands clasped in my lap to hide the tremor I couldn't control. The photo still burned in my memory. The woman in the blue dress, so similar to me, and the dates, those damned dates. Harold stopped before the window, broad back blocking the little light coming from outside. The dark coat seemed an extension of his heavy, threatening shadow. He rubbed his face with exhausted slowness, as if carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. "You shouldn't have entered the basement. It didn't need to be like this." His voice came out low, almost a tired whisper. "It didn't need to be like this?" My own voice failed, eyes burning. "Harold, who are those women? And why is there a photo of me there?" He turned slowly, eyes meeting mine with a coldness that sent a chill up my spine. "They're not what you think. I was trying to protect you. Protect both of us." Those words made me laugh, a shrill, almost hysterical sound that echoed through the empty room. "Protect? Do you have any idea how insane that excuse sounds? Harold, stored dresses, photos, a locked basement. You want to convince me this is to protect me?" The words escaped quickly, full of growing desperation. He sighed again, that expression of infinite tiredness. His eyes darkened a bit more, the blue almost disappearing in shadows. "They were past cases, nothing more than that. Women I knew before you." The answer should have relieved something inside me, but it only made the cold increase. For a second, I stayed silent, trying to process. "Then why keep the photos, the dresses?" I insisted, voice trembling. Harold looked away, fingers drumming, on the sofa arm as if searching for logic he himself couldn't find. "Because..." He hesitated, and that second of silence seemed to last an eternity. "Because I couldn't get rid of them. It was a mistake, I know, but you wouldn't understand." "Try me." The word came out almost cutting, loaded with rancor I didn't even know I had. "Make me understand, Harold." But he just rubbed his face again, heading to the kitchen without saying anything more. The door closed with a soft click, leaving me. Alone in the room, eyes burning with tears, I refused to let fall. The clock on the wall seemed to mark seconds with clicks too loud while darkness outside closed around the house. And I stayed there, hugging myself, trying to find meaning in Harold's empty answers while the feeling of living a lie clung to my chest. After all, what else was he hiding? And how far did the lies of this man I called husband go? That night stretched like an endless nightmare. After Charlie locked himself in his office, silence took over the house. I walked through dark hallways, soft light from lamps drawing elongated shadows on walls. Each step seemed to echo too loudly, as if the house had been empty for years. I couldn't sleep. The pillow felt like stone and the bed too cold. Images from the basement spun in my mind. Hanging dresses, yellowed photos, the rusty cage, and, worst of all, the photo of the woman in the blue dress with a date matching my wedding. The more I thought, the more fear grew, squeezing my chest until I could barely breathe. At dawn, I went down to the kitchen hoping to find peace in a cup of hot tea. My hands still trembled as I lit the stove, the kettle's whistle sounding like a muffled scream. I was so distracted I didn't notice Harold's presence until I saw him reflected in the window glass, standing in the doorway like a dark shadow. Couldn't sleep. His voice was low, hoarse, but his eyes looked like two black slits under the weak light. I didn't respond, just continued stirring tea with the spoon, the metallic noise filling the heavy silence. Charlie sighed, running his hand through his hair. "Dottie, listen to me. I was just trying to prevent you from—" He hesitated, searching for words that seemed to flee. "From knowing too much. Some things are better forgotten." Forgotten? I dropped the spoon with more force than intended, the dry sound echoing through the kitchen. "We've been married for 6 years, Harold. How do you expect me to forget this?" He looked away, gripping the table edge until his knuckles turned white. "Because it's not safe. Not for you, not for me." The words came out between his teeth, loaded with almost palpable tension. Fear mixed with anger, making my stomach churn. "Safe from whom, Harold? From your brothers who appeared without warning? Or from the women in the basement?" The acid tone of my voice made him raise his eyes suddenly, jaw muscles contracting. He seemed to fight against something inside him, shoulders fallen under, the invisible weight of secrets he carried. And then, almost in a whisper, "They're not my brothers. And those women—" His voice failed, and he passed his hand over his tired face. "Those women didn't deserve what happened." The air seemed to vanish from my lungs. Words stuck in my throat, while clock hands advanced slowly, marking each second of that deadly silence. "What did you do, Harold?" My voice came out so low I almost didn't believe I had spoken. But he didn't answer, just turned away, leaving me alone with a cold teapot and a feeling of emptiness so great it seemed impossible to fill. I spent the rest of dawn in the living room armchair, watching shadows lengthen and morning light seep through curtains. And for the first time, I was afraid of daybreak. Dawn arrived pale and cold, wrapping the house in even denser silence. Harold wasn't in bed when I woke, nor anywhere else in the house. His absence seemed to weigh more than his presence, leaving each room empty, lifeless. Newspapers continued piled on the porch, and the car key was still on its hook. It was as if he had evaporated. I thought about calling the police, but his words still hammered in my head. "It's not safe for you or me." Whatever that meant, I knew I couldn't trust anyone else. I spent hours trying to find some explanation, searched through his office again, thumbed through notebooks, old letters, any clue. And then I found it. Between 2 pages of a dusty book, a yellowed envelope with no addressee, only a date. February 1955, a year before I met Harold. Trembling hands tore the seal carefully. Inside, a single sheet of paper written by hand, Harold's familiar, careful handwriting. The first lines made my heart freeze. "If you're reading this, it's because the truth can no longer be hidden. I tried to protect you, Dottie, but some things can't be buried forever." I continued reading, blood throbbing in my ears while each sentence seemed like a blow. The letter spoke of old debts, broken promises, a destroyed family. Harold confessed to getting involved in something dark, a type of society that controlled much more than just local business. They dealt with money, influences, and people. But the worst came at the end. The women you found weren't strangers. They were witnesses, and I never wanted you to know about this. Lines danced before my eyes as I gripped the paper tightly. Fingers white. Witnesses. Missing women kept secret in that basement, like macabre souvenirs of something that shouldn't have come to light. The door crack pulled me from my trance. I stood up suddenly, legs wobbly, heart racing. Harold stood, in the doorway, expression defeated, eyes sunken like someone who hadn't slept for days. "You shouldn't have found that." His voice came out low, almost a lament. "Witnesses, Harold. I whispered, letter trembling in my hands. You hurt them? He seemed to crumble before my eyes, shoulders falling, lips trembling. It wasn't me. His voice was hoarse, pleading for me to believe. I was trying to clean things up so they wouldn't come after you. They? I spat the word, backing away a step. Who are they? He looked at the floor as if speaking was more dangerous than anything else. We need to leave here. Now. He advanced, hand extended, but I backed away instinctively, fear transformed into rage. Tell me the truth, I screamed, sound echoing off walls like a gunshot. If you want me to go with you, tell me who these people are. Who are these women? Harold stopped, eyes closed for a second too long. When he looked at me again, there was deep sadness in those blue eyes. If I tell you, they'll find us. And then, Dottie, then not even heaven will be enough to save us. Words stuck in my throat, and before I could say anything, the sound of tires on gravel outside interrupted. 3 black cars stopped before the house, doors opening simultaneously. Men in dark coats got out, faces impassive, while Harold paled, in a way I'd never seen. Too late, he murmured, voice a thread. The clock on the wall seemed to mark seconds more slowly, each tick a reminder that from then on, nothing would be like before. I clutched the letter against my chest, eyes fixed on those men advancing through the yard, and knew the truth would finally come to light, whether I liked it or not. The sound of knocking on the door echoed through the house like thunder, each blow stronger and more urgent than the last. I backed away instinctively, back colliding with the cold wall. Harold, face livid and eyes wide, pulled the curtain just a little, peeking at the line of black cars parked outside. Dottie, listen to me, he whispered, voice almost pleading. Don't open the door. No matter what happens, if they come in, you run. Understood? I should have obeyed, should have locked myself anywhere, but my legs seemed stuck to the floor. I couldn't get the basement images out of my head. The photos, hanging dresses like ghosts, and worst of all, the letter with that unfinished confession crumpled between my fingers. The doorknob crack cut through my thoughts. The door yielded with a dragging creak, and 3 men appeared in the room, filling the space with presents too heavy. The oldest of them, with graying hair and a dark overcoat, seemed to command the others. His eyes swept the environment with the calm of a predator who knows prey has nowhere to flee. Mr. Thompson, he spoke slowly, like someone who's tired of playing games. Don't you think it's better to resolve this once and for all? Harold swallowed hard, sweat shining on his forehead. He raised his hands in an almost peaceful gesture, but his fingers still trembled. She doesn't know anything, he murmured, voice weak. Please, leave her out of this. The man in the overcoat smiled, a cold, calculated smile. Now it's too late for that, don't you think? He made a discreet signal, and the other 2 advanced, pushing Harold against the wall. My throat burned with a stifled scream. My legs moved on their own, but before I could react, I felt firm hands holding my shoulders, dragging me to the nearest chair. The hard wood hurt my back, but the pain seemed distant compared to the crushing panic that made me gasp. Let's simplify things, Mrs. Thompson, the man in the overcoat began, adjusting his gloves with almost cruel calm. Your husband has some debts to settle. If he cooperates, we can guarantee nothing bad happens to you. His eyes passed slowly from me to Harold, who struggled against the 2 men, wrists held tightly. No, Dottie, don't say anything, he screamed, voice hoarse with desperation. But the leader's gaze met mine again, cold as ice. The choice is yours. He tilted his head like someone offering a reasonable deal. Either you talk, or he pays the price. And don't worry, we won't do anything. Too painful. Tears burned in my eyes, vision blurred between fear and rage. I didn't know what they wanted to know or how much time I had before something worse happened. But then a soft sound interrupted the silence, the click of metal against the floor. Harold had managed to free himself, if only for a second, and the gun fell from his waistband, spinning until it stopped before me. The man in the overcoat raised an eyebrow, smile disappearing. Well, seems your husband still has some fight in him. Panic propelled me before I could think. I leaned forward, fingers closing around the cold handle. I pointed it with trembling hands, arms seeming to weigh a ton. Let him go, I demanded, voice failing, almost unrecognizable. The men hesitated, eyes fixed on the weapon, but the leader just sighed, crossing his arms. And what do you intend to do, Dottie? Shoot? The tone was pure disbelief. My hands trembled so much, my fingers slipped on the trigger. The weight of decision seemed crushing, guilt throbbing in my temples. Harold, breathing heavily, looked at me with an expression that broke something inside me. Not fear, but pure regret. I'm sorry, Dottie, he whispered. And then, before I could react, he launched himself against one of the men, impact making everyone stumble backward. The confusion that followed was a blur of screams, hurried steps, and the sound of things falling. When the dust settled, the men were fleeing through the door, leaving only the echo of tires singing on asphalt. Harold, fallen on the floor with weak breathing, looked at me with a sad half smile, eyes welling up. I just wanted to keep you safe, he murmured, voice almost fading. I ran to him, knees meeting the cold floor, tears falling freely. I squeezed his hand tightly, sobs escaping without control. But his smile faded slowly, life escaping with each word. Forgive me, Dottie. But how do you forgive someone who destroyed everything? How do you forgive someone who hid so many lies, so many horrors in the basement of our home? His hand grip loosened, blue eyes closing slowly. The last thing I heard was the incessant tick-tock of the wall clock, counting seconds of a silence I would never be able to fill. After that night when Harold died in my arms, the house on Pine Street seemed even more somber, as if secrets had become heavier. Police asked quick questions, took the body, and closed the case as a settling of scores involving old debts. But nothing explained the photos in the basement, clothes of missing women, and especially the whisper I had heard from that smaller door hidden away. I knew I needed to go back there, that I needed to discover the truth before it died along with Harold. On a gray morning, with heart beating so loud it seemed to echo through walls, I descended to the basement for the last time. The smaller door was still ajar, like a macabre invitation. The lantern trembled in my hands as I advanced, slowly, steps echoing on the cold cement floor. It was only when I heard again a low moan, almost imperceptible, that I realized I wasn't alone. Behind rusty bars, in a dark corner of the basement, there was an improvised cell with thick metal bars roughly welded. And there inside, chained by the wrists, was a man. Pale skin, face covered by disheveled hair, clothes dirty with dust, but sunken, frightened eyes met mine with desperate urgency. You need to get out of here." His voice came out hoarse, failing, as if each word cost enormous effort. My heart froze. It was Andrew, Harold's twin brother, but his expression wasn't threatening. It was pure terror. What happened to you?" The question came out in a trembling whisper, fingers gripping the lantern as if it were the only anchor to reality. Andrew closed his eyes, face marked by pain. "Harold, he locked me here years ago, said it was to protect me, but..." His voice failed, almost a sob. They wanted to use me. The men in black cars, the same ones who killed Harold." The peace fell like thunder. "They were after you." My voice came out low, eyes wide. Andrew nodded slowly, wrists hurt by chains. "Charlie knew too much," he murmured, eyes vacant. "Our father was part of it, a circle. They used the family fortune to finance dirty business. When our father died, they tried to force me to continue. I tried to expose everything. But Harold... His voice failed again, eyes filling with bitter tears. Harold said it was too dangerous, that they would kill anyone who knew. So he locked me here. Shock made me step back hitting the cold wall. Harold wasn't protecting his brother, he was protecting himself. If the Circle men discovered Andrew was still alive and knew the secrets, they would kill everyone, Ikalia. Women in the basement weren't killed by Andrew, but to cover up the Thompson influence circle. The men in black cars weren't Andrew's accomplices. They were executioners sent by the Circle to eliminate any trace that could expose their crimes. They killed Harold because he knew too much, and now if they found Andrew... They're coming. "Back, Dottie. You have to run," Andrew whispered, eyes wide. "They can't know I'm alive." My hands trembled so much the lantern almost fell. There was no time. I looked for a tool on the shelves, anything to cut the chains, but footsteps upstairs cut through my reasoning. Firm, cold steps echoing slowly. "Please, go away," Andrew whispered, voice almost a thread. Fear seemed to freeze my legs, but something stronger made me stay. I found a crowbar among old tools, fingers still sweaty, and began forcing the chains with all the strength I could muster. Metal creaked, a click too loud for the heavy silence. "Come on, let's get out of here," I murmured, voice failing, eyes locked on Andrew's. The padlock finally gave way, falling with a dry crash. Andrew stumbled out of the cell, knees giving way, and I supported him as I could. Hurried steps through the narrow corridor, but before we could reach the stairs, the basement door opened with a bang. Men in overcoats, impassive faces, the same men who had killed Harold. The leader advanced slowly, eyes shining under weak light. Well. So this is where the last Thompson hides." His voice came out low, almost amused. "This will be easier than I thought." Desperation exploded in my chest, eyes moving from Andrew to the armed men. There was no exit, no forgiveness. But in a desperate impulse, I pushed Andrew back, feet searching for anything that could be used as a weapon, anything to buy time. Harold's words echoed in my head. "Run, don't trust anyone." Shots cut through the air, dry and loud. The last thing I remember were Andrew's eyes wide with horror while blood flowed across the cement floor. After that terrible night at the house on Pine Street, I thought I'd never see daylight again. But somehow, both Andrew and I survived. The men left believing they had silenced all secrets. Andrew was wounded, but alive, and together we managed to get out of that cursed house. In the following days, I burned letters, photos, and everything that remained of that family's sins, not to hide, but to finally leave the past behind. I gave police a letter telling everything I knew, as a last act of justice for women who lost their lives in silence. And then I left for a new city where no one knew my name. With time, I got a simple job, and gradually the shadows were left behind. Life was never the same, but I learned that surviving is an act of courage. Scars remained, but each dawn seemed like a new chance to start over. The house on Pine Street was demolished years later, taking with it all the horrors it kept. The circle of influential men dissolved, and somehow justice arrived. It wasn't perfect, but it was a beginning. Today, looking back, I know truth can hurt, but also liberates. And as long as there's a new dawn, there will always be hope. So if you made it this far, thank you for listening to this story. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from.